Hey there, Fantasy Grounds fans and community. This is founder Laerun. I'm here with FG College representing the Fantasy Grounds community, and I'm going to help you get started with learning how to use Fantasy Grounds. And the first thing we're going to do is kind of learn where to download it, how to set it up. We'll talk a little bit about licensing, that sort of thing. It won't be necessarily a tutorial in Fantasy Grounds. We can do that another time, and we have other videos out there. So this will help you get started with Fantasy Grounds VTT, and this will hopefully demystify some of the common issues that most people have when they first get started. So the first things first is I'm going to go to the website. Fantasy Grounds website is a resource for you. It has help files and all kinds of different things that will help you on your journey in learning Fantasy Grounds and getting it set up. So the first thing first is let's go to the website and we'll take a look at what's there to be offered. So I'm in my Chrome browser right now. I'll go to my shortcut for Fantasy Grounds. And right here you have the front page. Now this is where you would download the demo, or if you have the desire to purchase a license, you have those options too. So generally as a game master, you're going to want at least a subscription or the basic license. And if you want to host ultimately for everybody, then you can do a subscription for that or the license. So it just depends on what your budget is, but normally you can start with a demo, get a standard license and upgrade to Ultimate, or you can start with an Ultimate so you can host your games however you want to do it. There is a 30-day money-back guarantee if you do it through the store. If you purchase your license through the Steam store, they have a different policy. So if you purchase through Steam and you don't like your purchase, make sure you look at their return policy or their give back policy, because I think they don't really allow you a refund unless you do it within an hour or something like that. I don't know the exact terms, but just keep that in mind if you're using the Steam platform. Your options to have your money given back to you are a little bit less. So the next thing is the license rule sets. As you can see, there's quite a few here that are pictured. There are some that are not on here, and that probably is for space reasons. But there's all the major role-playing games, and then even some unique ones. They have Alien, and they have Vampire, and they have Savage World. So whatever you're into, they have different rule sets that you can pick up the licensing for when you buy the books and such. So the first thing you want to do is create an account. So when you come to the website, you will create an account and log in, and it takes you right to the forums. So the forums is kind of like your tool for all kinds of different things. So you have like an announcements channel, you have support. So if you're using Unity or still the old classic version, that's something that you would probably look into for help. There's find a games area, so if you want to look for games or conventions, or if you are offering games and such, you can list those there. And then you have the game systems themselves, which have their own unique categories. So for instance, Dungeons and Dragons, it has its own forum, and then within that are subforums. So if there's anything in here you're interested in that you want to follow up on, there are ways to subscribe to threads that either you created or someone else has created. For example, the House of Healing is where a lot of people go for looking for help. One of the biggest things is how do you use the new line of sight? How do you set that up? So go through here and read this stuff before you really get all worked up and angry. And read what other people have gone through and see if there's already a solution out there. But you would click on one of these links, and from there, once you've gone into the forum and you do a little bit of reading, you can probably find a problem that's already been solved or something similar to what you've already had before you start a new thread. I mean, you usually can find something on here that relates to your issue. One of the things you want to get used to is once you're logged in is there's some thread tools. And you can subscribe to the thread. So that means if anybody makes a comment or if there is some activity on the threads that you're interested in, it'll email you. So try to get used to this subscription model for the forums, because it's an easy way to follow it instead of having to come to the website every time and checking. You'll get an email anytime there's an update on any given thread, including ones that you create yourself. So that's a handy thing to know for Fantasy Grounds, because a lot of people don't realize that, but you can subscribe to the thread. I recommend, if you want to search a thread, I would use Google, and I would just put whatever your search term is, plus Fantasy Grounds, plus forums, and it will take you to everything a lot easier, because the search tool inside the thread itself isn't all that great. I think Google does a lot better job of getting you to what content you need. So I would recommend using Google to search for your things instead of the internal search thread. I'm not saying don't use it, but I'm saying that I have better results using Google or another browser. So the other thing is, once you have your account set up, this is going to be your username and your password for the Fantasy Grounds platform itself. So once you have a license and you have upgraded in your store menu, if you drop this down, you'll have your order history, and that's where all your licenses and your keys are stored. And then you also have your Paizo account synchronization, your Steam synchronization, and then you can activate a key from here. So it just depends on what your needs are. And then there's a shopping link, a bundle link, where you can actually go and buy everything in a bundle. There's the art subscription, which is really worth it. It's like, $10-15 a month, and you're getting like hundreds of dollars worth of things. So you're not nickel and diming yourself as far as buying everything at once, or for $15 here and there, when you can actually kind of stretch it out a little bit more. Some people like to just buy it, but I like the subscription model for the art assets. That's a pretty good idea, actually. And then there's personalized suggestions. So what that does is it makes it so that anything that you've purchased does not really show up here, but anything related does. So if there's something that you haven't purchased yet, it will give you some suggestions based off of your history and those sort of things. So that's kind of a cool thing. And then they have a new feature where you can hide things that you've purchased already. So that would be in the store, and they've been publicizing that recently. Smiteworks has. So use the website to your advantage. It actually has, it's an older forums format, but it actually has all the different sections for different things. So you have the House of Healing, you have a laboratory where you can discuss beta products. There's a place in here for people that create content. So if you're creating free stuff, you can put it in the armory. That's the create and share section. There's a workshop. You can discuss mods and how to create things and that sort of thing. And then there's a gallery that shows screenshots of things that people have created. So there's a forum for just about all your needs. And then, not to mention, there's the Discord. Fantasy Grounds has its own Discord, and there are a lot of people hanging out on there too. So you have a lot of options. There's also YouTube. There's tons of other avenues to get access to Fantasy Grounds itself. And this is where you would start. So you make an account. Once you're signed in and you have your account name, then I'd take a look at some of the forums and take a look around before you dive right in. And then go to the store and pick up a license. Or if you're just going to play with somebody else and you don't really want to invest anything, just use the demo. If you find that you don't like Fantasy Grounds, or it's just not your cup of tea, you can ask for a refund from the Fantasy Grounds store. If you do it from Steam, like I said earlier, you will probably not be able to get a refund unless it's like within 10 minutes or a half an hour. I don't remember what the statement was, but it's something like that. So Steam has a different return policy. The next thing is Steam versus Fantasy Grounds Store. Usually, if you're in the United States, it's just easy and better to go through the store, I think. The only time I'd ever use Steam is if I already have all my purchases there regarding Fantasy Grounds, or if I have like a big gift certificate or something, then I might stick with Steam. Or if you're in a different country outside the US, the Steam is definitely the platform to use. It will scale to your local economy. But if you want to support Smiteworks more and you don't want Steam to get its cut, then go to fantasygrounds.com and look at their store and buy directly, because they actually get a little bit better percentage that way. If you buy it from Steam, they have to get their cut, and it's not that big of a deal, but it is in the overall scheme of things. So if you really want to support SmiteWorks and Fantasy Grounds, I would buy directly from the store. The exception to that is, like I had said, that if you already have content on the Steam store and you have gift certificates and things that you can trade in, and that might be a thing. But that's basically the first step. And then you will download, or maybe you've already downloaded the demo. So once you've done that, you will install it on your machine, and there is a Mac and a Linux version and a Windows version. They all are a work in progress, so once you install it, it might change over time. So Fantasy Grounds evolves like weekly, daily sometimes. You just need to keep up with the changes, and those are put on display in the actual forums. So if you go to the Fantasy Grounds forums, and you go to the City Hall, normally they put up all the patch notes here. So if you have a little notification update, jump over to the forums and see if they've stated what they're going to do or what they've changed. And then that way you'll have an understanding of what was being fixed. And then you will hit the update button, and if you have a license, it will pull in all the free stuff, and it will pull in your license. And then you will be able to notice your license status will be over here on the right, and then your actual name will be on the left. So that is something that you want to look at. And then on the top left corner, it will show that the lobby is connected. On the very top left of the interface, there is a hamburger menu here, these lines. That is where your logs are compiled. So when you run things, it'll create a log, and then if you're having trouble, that's the file you can send customer service. You also have a folder to get into the back end of Fantasy Grounds, so that's where like all your files and your artwork and your custom content is stored. And then on this front screen here, you can go into your settings, and in the settings you can plug in your Fantasy Grounds forums ID. You can set in all of your information. So I'm going to switch over to my screen share so that you can see what's going on. So I will switch over to the other screen so you can see better, because now I'm moving away from the actual website. And I'm going to go to the Windows capture. Let's see. There we go. Get rid of the Windows capture. Okay, so this shows everything. So hopefully, yeah. So this is the updater. And in here, this is when you click settings. So you can put your license key in here. You put your username and your password for the forums. If you don't have a key yet, that's all right. Just go ahead and put your username and password and hit save. Well, you got to log in first, and then you hit save. And then once you get your key, you plug it in there, you hit save, and it will tie you into the store. Also, if you want a little bit more room on your desktop, you can scale your UI here. I have mine set to 80, so that's kind of depends on your vision and what type of screen you have and how big your monitor is. The account tab, this is a shortcut. This will allow you to go to the Steam store or the Paizo store if you want to link your purchases with the Fantasy Grounds store. I recommend that. The advance is where your directories are. I wouldn't mess with this a whole lot unless you kind of get used to Fantasy Grounds and you have a little bit more experience with it. And then the troubleshooting area is where you can show your setup. You can clear the vault, which will help get rid of any potential downloads that may have gotten corrupted. You can clear your settings. You can force an app update, and you can also gather logs for troubleshooting purposes. So normally, you'll gather these up for customer service if you're having some serious issues. So email customer service if that's the case. If it's something minor or if it's not money related, come on over to the Fantasy Grounds College or go to the Fantasy Grounds official Discord, and they'll help you out too. It's usually user error or something overlooked or something not very not as critical as some other problems that you might run across. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And then if you have any updates, you'll click the update button. It'll go through its cycle and it'll pull in any purchases that you've made or any recent updates. Now, one of the things you want to avoid is updating Fantasy Grounds right before you play a game. Usually Tuesdays is a big release day, although there have been other days because of the recent implementation of a lot of changes and updates to Fantasy Grounds. So it's not in beta anymore. It's actually considered a public release. But you'll find, at least for the next year or so, there'll be quite a few updates to bring it up to where they want it. And also, they are retiring the older Fantasy Grounds Classic. So that's any day now. That's going to be the support for it will kind of still be there, but the actual content creation and offerings and such will start to slow down and become null and void. I don't know when the actual cutoff date is going to be, but they'll support it up to a point, but they're not going to make new content for it. And it actually takes more time to double up and create content for both. So it's getting to the point, mission critical, to where Fantasy Grounds is actually getting past the Classic and getting into more of the Unity side of things. I did a poll several months ago, and I found out that 70% of the people at that time or more were already using Unity. So I imagine now it's probably higher. It's probably like 90%. So if you still have Classic, you may want to start thinking about migrating over to Unity if you can. There are ways to do it safely. Just check on the forums. There's some guides out there, and there's even some videos out there. It's not that hard, but what you'll find is if you have a lot of older content, like from the DM's Guild, some of the characters are going to look funny because they weren't updated to Unity standards, or they may not show at all, and that has to do with the file structure is a little bit different between Fantasy Grounds and Fantasy Grounds Unity. So there is a fix and a workaround for that, but nonetheless, if you have a lot of older DM's Guild content, you might run into issues with that. And it's just a matter of understanding how to fix it. There is a solution out there. So that's basically how the updater works. And once you're done, if you had any issues, you can click on the log, and it'll give you the actual, the diagnosis and all the different things that you have. And then you have the launch Fantasy Grounds button here. So you can click that, and it will take you right back into Fantasy Grounds itself, the actual client. So when you connect to Fantasy Grounds, whether you're a player or just checking it out, normally what you're doing is you have, let me get to the actual, there we go. So normally what you have is this launch screen, and you'll have a sense of where you're going to be trying to use when you first start using it. So you might load a campaign that you've already created, or you might create a campaign depending on what rule sets you've purchased or what kind of basic core rules it has. Like the D&D has SRD basic stuff in it. So even if you don't buy anything, there's a little bit of content in there. But generally, you can connect through the cloud. So if you're a player, you would go to Join Campaign. Your game master, your host, will give you the credentials, the password if applicable, and then you'll look for his name here in the cloud if it's visible, and you'll click on it and hit Start, and then it will go to the launch screen, and it will tell you that you need a password or whatever credentials the GM put in. And it is hosted on a connection server, not a game server. So in other words, the connection is what's facilitated, not the actual content. So the books and the artwork and the program is on your actual computer. The license and the handshaking process and your password, those sort of things, are stored in your server. That way, when you log in, it identifies who you are, and then it also has a secure way to keep your connection facilitated. But that's all it does. It doesn't actually host the game. So if you're experiencing lag or you're having issues, probably a wireless thing if you're on a wireless connection, or it could be a number of things from your host. There's all kinds of reasons for it, but generally when you connect, it's usually pretty good. But if you're having trouble with that, get a hold of customer service, and they'll help you work through some issues. There's some troubleshooting that can be done. I'm not going to get into all this networking stuff, but generally it's usually user error, and it usually boils down to bandwidth. So even if your DM and all of your players have good computers, if you don't have good bandwidth, in other words, if your GM doesn't have a good upload speed, then it's tough for the rest of you to receive that data. So even if I have good internet, sometimes I have bad days, and that's because my kids are on their Xboxes and a wife is watching some Netflix, and I got all kinds of things going on that will take your bandwidth away. And if that's the case, then you're sending less data to your players, and you're creating that lag. So it's a lot more to do with the internet as opposed to Fantasy Grounds or your computer. Now, if you got a really old computer, that will probably slow things down for you. But generally, if you have a computer that was built within the last 4 years, it should be pretty good. Laptops are your next best bet. They tend to work, 90% of the time, but they usually have issues because they're outdated, or they have a bandwidth issue because you're not plugged into the actual Ethernet, whatever the case may be. I wouldn't recommend trying to use it on a tablet or a phone or anything like that. It was not designed for those devices. Like I said, try to avoid wireless or satellite connections, or using your telephone or cell phone as a hotspot. There's just not enough information bandwidth for Fantasy Grounds to work properly. So just keep that in mind. I know people have done it. They've found workarounds, but for all that work and stuff, I don't think it's worth it. And you have the potential of slowing down everyone else because you have a really weak connection. So there's things to consider when you're using Fantasy Grounds. There is a forum link that talks about the minimum requirements. I don't memorize them off the top of my head, but definitely something you want to take in consideration before you go out and buy it. A lot of people will just buy it, install it, find out it doesn't work, then they complain about it, then they realize their machine is too old. So if that's the case, then just get your refund and move on, or find another way to connect, because it's not worth all the complaining and whining and fighting and everything. Just you got to understand the requirements that are needed, and you need to understand that you have to have some form of license to either create content or to have the ability to make characters. If you're connected to a host or like a game master, he can share that stuff with you while you're connected. But once you're disconnected from your client, you cannot do anything else really with your character. You might be able to write a backstory or something, but you can't really build or update or do anything like that. So you either have to have a host that has a ultimate license, or at least a standard license if you have a standard license, or you need to have individuals that actually own content and that have a license. So if you want a subscription and just check it out for less than 30 days and maybe just buy one of the core books, that's a good start. And that'll give you a kind of an idea, a feel for what's going on. Like I said, there's a lot of resources out there. Like the community I'm part of is Fantasy Grounds College. We are dedicated to helping you kind of figure things out and give you exposure to the rule sets, and give you a place to kind of find help and find other people that'll walk you through things, that sort of thing. But for the most part, it's going to be on you to put your time in and to actually learn how to use the software. That's one of the things. There's no real easy button, and a lot of different virtual tabletops have the same type of hurdles. So if you think one tabletop is better than the other, well, think again, because they all have different strengths and weaknesses. So if you're one of those people that says, well, I like Foundry better, or I like Roll20 better, well, that's fine, but to push that on everyone else is unnecessary. You just learn how to use the software. And then if you have problems, there are resources for you. And then if you don't like it, you can get your money back. So, and of course, I did mention that if you do it on Steam, I think they have a different return policy. So don't forget that. So anyways, that's how you get started. So you go to the website, you form an account, which is your website forums access and your password. Then you download the client, the software that you want to use. So there's Linux, Mac, and there is the Windows. And then once you do that, then you can kind of browse around in the forums and take a look at what's going on before you go out and buy everything. Maybe just download the demo, and you can come over to the college and connect with somebody and see if you actually even like it. some people complain about the interface, and there's little things that everyone will find a problem with. One of the only things I could say is the font sizes are a little bit hard to read, but other than that, the interface is pretty sound. Once you understand where everything is and how things work, it really starts to sink in. Another thing is if you watch people playing online, or if you go to the videos, there's tons of them out there to teach you how to use the software if you want it, or even examples of play, things that you may need while you're using Fantasy Grounds. But that's what you do first. You set up your account on the website, download the demo. You go into the demo settings, and you plug in your username and your password. Then you update Fantasy Grounds. After you update it, it will pull in anything that you've purchased, if you bought a license or anything like that. And then it will pull in any type of updates. And then once it restarts, then you start your session, or maybe you're going to connect to a game, whatever it is. So generally, I would just start off with a basic subscription and maybe buy one book and just see what it's like, and maybe take a look around at some videos, or go into the various Discords, and people will help you with it. So the community is really good about that. There's a lot of people out there that are willing to stop for a minute and show you what to do. So that's kind of up to you. Or if you're a self-learner and you don't like that type of interaction, just struggle through it like I did, and eventually it'll sink in. It's one of those things where you have to use the tool to understand it. It's no easy button. You're not going to learn it in 5 seconds. So if you're looking for an easy button, this is not the place for it. It's something that is based off the usage and how familiar you are, and what type of exposure you've had to virtual tabletops, those sort of things. Some people come from other virtual tabletops and they'll complain, oh, it doesn't do this or it doesn't do that. Well, it's a completely different thing. Roll20 and Foundry and Fantasy Grounds are 3 different platforms. They offer similar content, but they all have their strengths and weaknesses. So if you break down costs and usages and what's available and what's licensed and all that stuff, I think Fantasy Grounds has the edge a little bit. I'm saying that a little on the bias side, but definitely I think it has a good solid foundation. A lot of the other virtual tabletops are still growing, and they'll improve, and Fantasy Grounds will improve. So it really depends on your needs and your play style. But as far as the actual software goes, I think Fantasy Grounds is pretty solid. It offers you a lot of automation, and it also gives you the ability to put in content. Takes a little practice with that stuff, but once you understand it and it sinks in, then you'll really like it. So I think that's basically the majority of what I'm going to cover today. Again, this wasn't a Fantasy Grounds tutorial, but it's just kind of a way to get you started in Fantasy Grounds. If you hang around for a little bit longer, I'm going to come back with a different video, and I'm actually going to use the character builder, which is in the D&D 5e rule set, and I'm going to build a spellcaster. And last time I built a fighter. So this time I'm going to build a spellcaster. It's a little bit more complex. And I'm going to leave out some of the automation that I did in the other video, because I kind of went off the rails trying to show that. So I'm going to help you guys out with character creation. So give me about 15 minutes. I'll come back. Same time, same station. I'll actually be in Fantasy Grounds. I'll be using the 5e rule set in this case to show. And then I will go through the character wizard, which is something that people will have to face if they're going to build characters, whether you're a game master or a player. So I'll be back shortly at the top of the hour. I'm going to take a little break, and we'll be right back. Bye-bye.